There are some conversations that we must make comfortable in every household and society as a whole. There are also moving stories of perseverance and purpose that not only uplift others, but inspire us all to think and reach higher in hopes of positively affecting someone else. Throughout my journey, I've been fortunate enough to have been a part of some amazing conversations and witnessing wonderful stories of transformation, including my very own. And now I share them with you. Your stories, your narratives, our inspiration. I'm Cory George, and this is One on One. Welcome to One on One, and I'm your host, Cory George. Intimate partner violence is a social epidemic that does not discriminate and can affect anyone regardless of age, gender, color, economic class, or sexual orientation. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States alone. This equates to more than 10 million women and men per year. But intimate partner violence comprises more than just physical violence. And we hope today's conversation sheds light on this epidemic that affects individuals, children, families, and communities. And so joining me today is poet, author of Break the Silence and Bloom, Miss Sistah Fran, and also founder of 108 organization, motivational speaker, and author, Troy Jones. And so thank you guys both so much for joining me today and having this important yet personal conversation. Absolutely. So the first thing I want to ask is, and we talked about this offset, how do you feel that your upbringing or nurturing, not say prepared you, but may have led to you being able to accept being abused and not recognizing it for what it was in the beginning?
So growing up, I experienced childhood abuse, physical, sexual, and emotional by my biological father. And that took place for about 4 years.
Okay.
So I felt like when the abuse occurred with my son's father, that it was an ordeal that I was just too familiar with. So it wasn't just like, oh, wow, this is happening to me. It was sort of more like, this is my comfort zone because this is what I have endured as a child.
So do you feel that in having had experienced it at a younger age, that you had to normalize it in order to deal with it, and it became something that you almost expected in your future relationships, and it set a lower standard for what you would? Okay. And so what about you, Troy?
Well, for me, I didn't realize it in my marriage that I was being abused. It wasn't physical. That would have been obvious, but it was emotional, and I didn't realize that because that's not something that, growing up we talked about. It wasn't taught, so I was clueless on how to defend myself emotionally or even realize that something was off, so just not having those conversations as a youth just kind of, I guess in some sense, set me up where I had no clue of what was going on.
And so you said something, well, actually you said two things that are very telling. But the first thing I want to ask you, being a man, because we often don't hear that men are abused, although we sort of talk about it, but it's more of it's the sub story. So for you being a man that is actually saying on camera, hey, I've been abused, was that initially hard for you to accept for yourself, first of all, and then talk about how that was received when you started to tell the story of being a man who was actually saying, yes, I was abused?
Wow. You're right. I had no idea. It wasn't until I had a doctor's appointment and the doctor told me that he gave me less than a year to live. And that's when I really started putting the pieces together. So I reached out to a couple of different friends and just said, can you really be honest with me? And at that point, I was willing to hear their opinions about what the relationship had looked like for years to them. Leaving that relationship, I quickly realized that there wasn't any support for me. There's a lot of support for men in other areas, but in just wanting to have a healthier relationship and deal with that type of abuse, the resources were minimal. And so the first time I shared the story was at an event and I was very nervous. And the backlash was severe. It actually, in some sense, made me want to be quiet even more, because the abuser reached out via Facebook, social media, and just started saying some very horrible things that wasn't true at all. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I should just be quiet about this. So after some prompting from some friends and that new support group that I gathered around me, they said, no, you have to keep going. You have to keep going. So I decided to keep moving forward.
So do you feel that the backlash from your abuser was another form of abuse?
Absolutely.
Like, because usually in abuse, it's a form of control.
Yeah.
So the way that I heard that response was, they're just furthering along that abuse.
Yes.
And also a type of control. But also in your case, because this was a man that you had children with.
A child, yeah.
Well, a child. How did that responsibility play in your decision to stay as long as you did stay?
That was like the hardest part for me. It was just like, should I stay because I have a child? It wasn't until my son was 6 years old, and he was actually exposed to the violence, and he asked me, "Mom, are you okay?" So I'm like, well, he's starting to realize what's going on, and me being an advocate for children of abuse, exposing your children to violence is a form of abuse. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so I knew that it was then that I I'm sorry. It was then that I knew that it was time for me to get out of that relationship.
And so in the intro, I did say that it not only affects the individual, but it also affects the children and the family, and as well as that community.
Yeah.
What do you think that your son experienced as he was witnessing you going through this? Better question. Were you afraid of the standard that it was setting for him, watching his mother be abused and watching another female be abused?
So one of the things that I would always do when I was experiencing the abuse, I would put him in the room or somewhere away from it, or when I felt the tension, when I knew that something would happen. But he was a lot younger at the time. Like, he just didn't understand what was going on. It was a lot easier. But as he became older, he started to realize that this is not right, because if he didn't know, he wouldn't have asked, "Mom, are you okay?" So that's when I knew it was time to leave the relationship.
And so, Troy, you have two daughters. Well, you had two daughters in that marriage, right?
Yes,
or was it
and
one
a
daughter?
son.
It was two. So you being a man going through this, and inversely from her having daughters, were they witnessing what was going on? And if so, what do you think that experience was for them?
So I would have to say no. My son, my stepson, he had a better understanding because he saw the things that happened when I wasn't home.
Okay.
That he later shared with me. So the emotional abuse is so covert that most people don't know it. And I'm thinking, in this relationship, if I wasn't aware, there was no way that I was guarding my children as to what to look for. And so no, they didn't know. It was normalized. The belittling or talking down or undermining or, just the passive aggressive, those things were normalized because that's all I knew. I knew that it didn't feel good. It never felt good. And I wanted to voice things at times, but I wasn't prepared. I wasn't really equipped. Adolescent, growing up didn't equip me to have that type of battle.
I wanted to ask you especially, what was the turning point? What was that day or that moment that you said, "I've had enough and I have to risk something in order to save myself"?
So it was one thing when the abuse would take place, like within the walls of our homes, that it started to, take place out in the public, first in the car and then in the public eye. And then the yelling, and he would talk down to me, and then I would not look him in his face. "Oh, you need to look me in my face." "Oh, I want to slap you. It was just becoming too comfortable. And it was just like, okay, something needs to be done. And about 4 years ago, on the 4th of July, I was fed up, and I reached out to my older sister, who's like my mother.
Mhm.
We're very close. And I'm like, I have to tell her. And I know that once I shared it with her, that there will be no turning back, because she's going to make sure that, you know, I don't go back into that toxic relationship. And so I called her and I shared it with her. And she basically, guided me on my next steps,
Okay.
on what needs to be done.
And so what I hear is that it was basically getting so comfortable, but it was escalating.
Yeah, it was escalating.
So as one level became a level of comfort,
Yeah.
it was escalating as if he needed more control.
Yeah. It wasn't getting any better.
Okay. And so Troy, so you having kids and you being the man in the house, and how hard was it for you to say, I'm done? Because as a man, we're the ones that are supposed to stick around and supposed to take care of the family. How hard was that for you to say, I'm done with this?
Extremely hard, extremely difficult. And that actually became the downfall. When I made the decision that I don't want to deal with this level of abuse anymore, it actually, I had a conversation with her. I said, listen, I can't go any further with this, but before we dismantle this, because clearly you've left the relationship before this time, why don't we put all of our ducks in a row? And immediately she said, give me a day that you're leaving. And, that was a shock. Like, wow, okay, this is really being real. In the back of my mind, I was still hoping that she would say, no, don't do this. We can work this out. But those words never came out. So she demanded that I give her a deadline. And in my head, I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my daughters? Like, what am I do with my son? And this is difficult, but that deadline came up and she made sure, like, hey, look, you need to go. You need to leave. And I left. I found a safe place to go. And within a couple of months, she had filed for divorce. So in my mind, I'm thinking she's still going to come back. We can definitely work this out. So it was very hard. It was very hard.
What was the defining moment that made you decide that I've had enough?
Well, that moment was, I was having a conversation with my daughters about something that they were earning, and they had a friend over. And the abuse had become so severe that she verbally just degraded me in front of the child, the friend, the neighbor. And in that moment, when the children cleared out, I told her that I can't do this anymore. And so it was extremely difficult. It was very hard because which man gets married and want to leave or lose that family? And that became apparent. So I had to make that decision, and as difficult as it was something that needed to be done. But she was the one that gave me a deadline to get out. I waited. However, that apology or that reunification conversation never happened. And shortly after I left, she filed for divorce.
Yeah. So, and so at this time, we're going to take a short break. But when we come back, we're going to talk about how they use their testimony to feed their passion and purpose, and how that passion and purpose is serving others in their community.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. Talk with your doctor to create a plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
And we're back, and thank you so much for joining us. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about intimate partner violence. And of course, I'm still here with my guest, Mr. Cory Jones and Sister Fran. So again, thank you so much for helping me bring this conversation to light, because we can never talk about this enough. But the great thing now is that both of you are not in just new relationships, but both of you are married again. Well, I think this is your first marriage, right?
Marriage, yeah.
So I want you to talk to the audience about what are the differences that you recognize in yourself, having gone through your healing process, that was able to allow you to see what a healthy relationship should feel like.
Well, for one, I knew that if I were to date, or find the man of my dreams, he would have to be an example for my son to follow.
Okay.
And that one of the most important things that I focused on was his relationship with his mother. Because I knew that meant that, in my previous relationship with my son's father, he had a very toxic relationship with his mom. And I knew that was probably why, he was very abusive towards me. So I always said that if I were to look for my future husband or go back in the dating scene, that one of the things that I will really pay attention to is his relationship with his mother. And when I started to date my husband, he really spoke highly of his mother, and he was a mama's boy, but you know, the respect was there. The respect for his mother was there. Um, the unconditional love for my son was there.
What about you, Troy? What was different? What did you recognize differently about not just yourself in choosing a partner, but also about the partner you chose that made it okay for you to try again?
Wow, it's a really good question. And I decided to really work on me. I looked at the statistics of how many relationships you would have after your first marriage and it would fail. And I remember thinking, that's not going to be me. That who created this anyway?
Right.
And my faith, I wanted a stronger faith, and I said, well, God, I want to work more on me. And so instead of blaming my ex for everything, I flipped it and started thinking more of how was I toxic? What caused this? Why would I allow something like that? And so I began to really focus more on myself, and I don't want this in the next relationship. I want to be able to hold my new wife and know that she really loves me, and this isn't just pretending for the world. So I did the hard work, and I know it may not be popular with a lot of people, but I decided to say, God, you choose. And in order for me to do this work, to work with men and to help support them, I'm going to need for you to do this for me. And that's what I wanted. I wanted someone that was going to put God first. I wanted someone that either had healed from an unhealthy relationship or have never been in one, period. And more importantly, I needed to know that I could protect myself emotionally and would be okay with that, walking away from a relationship regardless. And that hard work paid off.
And so you mentioned doing the work. What type of work does that mean? Does that mean therapy? Does that mean self-help? Does that mean prayer? Does it mean self-reflection? What was that work for you?
Yes, and yes, and all of it. Stepping out, I tried the support group, but it was co-ed, and I just didn't feel comfortable with that. I had a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, but still a lot of respect for women, and I just didn't feel comfortable doing that. And so I decided to write a curriculum and create my own, where I felt like creating an environment where men felt really comfortable sharing. So in that process, that was my therapy. In addition to that, I journaled a lot in my ex relationship, my past relationship. And so reading through those journals helped a lot, to reflect. So between the journal writing and writing the curriculum, that was very therapeutic.
Okay.
For me.
Well, and that leads into your support group. Can you tell us more about B6 and what the function and the purpose is, and what do you hope that its members, I guess if you call them members, what do you hope that they get out of attending that support group?
Okay, so B6 is a men's support group, and we have it every week. I decided to do it weekly because men don't suffer quarterly or
Right.
annually.
Right.
We go through this stuff daily. So to provide an outlet for them weekly. Curriculum, it was designed to really target the areas that we neglect, the subject matters that we neglect in our lives as men, and just to go beyond the surface and to really get deep. So I don't ask what your profession is because I don't care. I just ask that you show up as a man and be willing to be honest and transparent to support one another. So I hope they take that and the home assignments that we give and take it into their communities, into their families, so we can prevent these type of things from happening.
Awesome. And I know that that I don't know if the book is out or that it's about to come out, Break the Silence and Bloom, which the title itself is almost self-explanatory. But as his work was therapy for him, do you feel that writing this book was therapy for you? And what do you hope to provide to survivors or even people who are going through it right now? What outlook do you hope that your project offers?
So the book Break the Silence and Bloom, My Poetic Testimonies, was written to encourage those affected by abuse to share their story. I've also started an initiative called Break the Silence and Bloom, and the mission of that initiative is to use poetry as a platform to raise awareness and to encourage those affected to share their story. I've been writing poetry since I was about 12 years old.
Speaking from the point of view of where you are now, what would you tell that former version of yourself in order to prepare them to get out of it sooner? What would you tell that former version of yourself to look for much sooner than you had the opportunity to look for?
Wow. I would tell my former self that it's okay to trust your gut. It's okay to go against the status quo or the social norms. That it's okay that as a man that you don't have to fit into the stereotype of what a man is supposed to be. It's okay to say no. And it's okay to walk away, to save yourself before trying to save other people.
Okay, and what about you, Fran? What would you tell that person, well, that version of yourself that learned to expect a substandard level of treatment?
What would I tell my, you said the younger version of myself?
Yes.
That you matter and that what you have experienced as a child or an adult does not define you.
Okay, great. Well, you know what? And we don't want to ignore the LGBT community at all because, as I said before in the intro, this epidemic has no barriers and has no boundaries. So I do want to go to slide number 2, and I actually want to read these stats because if you're in the situation now and you don't feel that it applies to you, it just may. So I want to say that 43.8% of lesbian women and 61.1% of bisexual women have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner at some point in their lifetime. 26% of gay men and 37.3% of bisexual men have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Also, it says in a study of male same-sex relationships, only 26% of men call the police for assistance, which means that there's also 74% of unreported cases. So the number goes up. Lastly, I want to say that transgender victims are more likely to experience intimate partner violence in public as compared to those who do not, as opposed to those who do not identify as transgender. So we want to make sure that we include everyone in this because everyone is affected, right? And this was a question that I just thought about as I'm reading this. So I want to ask both of you this. If you were to come across someone that is in the throes of dealing with this right now, that is in the fight right now and can't make a decision and doesn't understand, what would you tell that person as a first point of advice as they're dealing with the struggle?
My first point that I would tell them is to write it down. Write it down because a lot of times you second guess yourself. You question, is this real? Is it really happening? And if you're going to be completely honest with yourself, write down every single detail of that day and that moment and go back and read it. And if your own language to yourself is consistent with the type of life that you want, then stay. But if it's not consistent with the type of life that you want, then you need to start making a plan.
But I want to add a point is that when you said write it down, and for those watching, and in terms of documenting your abuse when you're afraid to talk about it, if you keep a journal with dates, you have, that's actually proof of the abuse. Because oftentimes, if you say something and there's no physical evidence, they can't document the case for you. So there are times where people will journal for 6 months and say, hey, in the last 6 months on this day and this time, this happened. So that acts as evidence in some cases. I want to say also to anyone who may suspect that someone is going through it, if you see someone show up at work or show up at a place of business or even in casual settings and you feel that they're being abused, document what you see. Document that black eye that shouldn't be there. Document that bruise on the arm that shouldn't be there, because the person may be in fear of reporting, but you may be the reporting factor for them. So those are just some key points in helping your case, just in case you need to have assistance in your matter. But I want to actually throw the question back to you. What would you tell that person who may be going through exactly what you were going through at that time? What would be your first point of advice for them?
To reach out to your family and friends, and even though we would love or hope for it to change, or that person to change, it's only going to get worse.
Wow. Okay. So and that's what I hear from both of you is, in some way express it.
Yeah.
In some way express it, whether it's telling somebody or it's writing it down, which I do feel like that is one of the most cathartic things to do, is to write it down. And as you said, look back at it and judge yourself. Judge exactly where you are. And if it doesn't feel right, and usually if it doesn't feel right, it's not right. So we have to drive that message home. If it doesn't feel safe for you, if you feel unsafe, 10 times out of 10, you are unsafe. I want to make sure that people know that if you are someone that you know is currently experiencing intimate partner violence, you can call National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. And it's a private call, and they're there to offer you resources in your local area that will help you. And I want to take a moment to actually thank you both for being so courageous, especially you, Miss Fran, for this being your first time telling your testimony. It's affecting someone in a positive way, because someone watching is the former version of you.
Yes.
And is going to get their freedom by watching what your victory looks like. And for Troy, I want to thank you and also commend you for forming a men's support group, because we don't have enough of that for the men who are suffering. And I actually went on the website and I saw all the testimonies, and it's a breakthrough for everyone who I was able to actually witness writing their testimony. It was awesome. So I want to know what's next for you guys. What's coming up next for you, Troy?
Oh, what's next for me is that well, in Baltimore, we were just invited into a town called Sandtown in Baltimore, and so we're in the community doing the work that we said that we're going to do. So that's going to open up more doors. I just have a book that came out, Relentless Pursuit. It's co-authored. So you can go to the website at 108organization.org. And we're just looking to grow. This curriculum is designed to be in every community across the country, because men need that support.
Okay, awesome. And how do people find out more about you and your cause?
Through my website, which is breakthesilenceandbloom.com. And I have a lot of events that are coming up in April of 2019, because April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, so I'm very involved in the community with my child abuse prevention efforts. I'm also working on my next book called Bloom Through the Battlefield. It's focused on mental illnesses, which is the aftermath of childhood abuse.
Okay.
So that's my next project.
Awesome. And so this is all we have for you for part 1 of Intimate Partner Violence, the Faces and the Facts. So make sure you stay tuned for part 2 next week, right here on One-on-One with Cory George. Thank you for watching.